Hello, my friends. It is Friday, TGIF. Joining me today, the great Bill Boyle. Bill B in D.C. for a wide-ranging conversation on current events, foreign events, and more. Always a great talk, and today, no exception. With Bill, love getting his perspective on everything that's happened this week, where I feel like I've been playing a lot of catch-up, and a busy one for me, and I hope that you had a great week. Sorry that I had to cancel last night's hangout, but I will be hosting a hangout tonight. If you are a subscriber, I hope to see you at 8 p.m. on Friday. Many of you couldn't make it last night anyway, or can't make it on Thursday night. Join us for the Friday night hangout, 8 p.m. East. But yet last night I couldn't do it because I got two invitations, not one, but two invitations to appear on cable news programs. First, it was a taped segment, a whole panel, long panel on MSNBC's 11th Hour. That'll air tonight, which I think was pretty good. I was with Jose Diaz-Balart, Alex Witt, and the U.S. managing editor of the Financial Times, someone I'd never met, Peter Spiegel, who I really enjoyed being on the panel with. You can watch that tonight at 11 East on MSNBC, and I also appeared on News Nation. That was live last night on Dan Abrams' show, talking about comedian Hassan Minhaj and his, quote, emotional truths. And you can watch that whole segment, I think, on my Twitter account because I tweeted it out, but I'll share that on social media as well. And maybe include the audio of it on a upcoming episode because it was a good conversation and I think it's worthy of sharing, but not today because I've got to get to my conversation with Bill Boyle. Before I do, just want to mention two big stories from yesterday. First, government looks like it's going to shut down. Yesterday, Kevin McCarthy and the kids in his Republican caucus couldn't agree on anything. They're tearing each other apart and then just went home for the weekend. And Joe Biden, President Biden, tweeted out, last time there was a government shutdown, 800,000 Americans were furloughed and worked without pay. But enjoy your weekend, as a barb to Congress, the Republicans, for closing it down and heading home for the weekend after the extremists, the hardliners, once again tanked plans to fund the government. And just on that, I wanted to read quickly part of Paul Krugman's column because he has a lot of context in it for previous government shutdowns. But he says about this one, even this extreme proposal wasn't enough for Republican hardliners. I liked what one representative told Politico. Some of these folks would vote against the Bible because there's not enough Jesus in it. The point is that the party's right wing isn't actually interested in governing. It's all about posturing, and the budget fight is a temper tantrum rather than a policy dispute. If the GOP were anything like a normal party, McCarthy would give up the right on the right-wingers, gather up the sane Republican representatives. It would be misleading to call them moderates and make a deal with Democrats. But that would almost surely cost him the speakership. And in general, more or less, the whole GOP is terrified of the hardliners. So the party's positions end up being dictated by its most extreme faction. As I said, all this is very different from what happens on the other side of the aisle. Yet, you still sometimes see analysis that treat Democrats on the left and Republicans on the right as equivalent, but they are nothing alike. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party is, in fact, interested in policy. It tries to push the party's leadership in its direction, but it's willing to take what it can get. That's why Pelosi, with only a narrow majority during Biden's first 2 years, was nonetheless able to get enacted landmark bills on infrastructure, climate, and technology, while McCarthy can't even keep the government running. Yeah, perfectly said. I've been saying that different ways for a long time. Paul Krugman, the New York Times. He also said, of course, the GOP is terrified of the hardliners. Why are they terrified of the hardliners? I can tell you why. Right-wing media, and most importantly, Fox News, which is the other thing I just wanted to mention before I get to Bill Boyle. And I talked about both of these issues with Bill on our conversation today. But again, the New York Times, in its morning email on Friday, Jonathan Mahler, writing for the magazine, covering Rupert Murdoch's impact on American life and politics, which he says no one has had a bigger impact on modern American media and politics than Rupert Murdoch, who announced he'd be stepping down yesterday and leaving the reins to his son Lachlan, which I forget which one of the characters in HBO's Succession he's most like, but I just wanted to read a little bit of Jonathan Mahler in the New York Times talking about this. And he writes, Fox derived its clout from its unique relationship with its audience. Murdoch was his businessman and Fox News was a business, which meant that ratings above all drove programming decisions. In this sense, Fox was a nonstop Republican message testing machine. The goal was always to find what resonated with Fox viewers, a group that was becoming synonymous with the Republican base, and then double or triple down on it. In fact, a study in 2007, Mahler writes at the beginning of this piece, a study established what became known as the Fox News effect. The introduction of the network on a particular cable system typically pushed local voters to the right. It's such a big deal. I mean, I don't know what it means for Fox News if it's going to be sold off to Elon Musk, as Kara Swisher said yesterday. The future of Fox News sold for parts. I don't know. The future of cable news really is in doubt. And who knows what's going to happen to all the Murdoch-owned media properties. But it's so important to talk about, examine, and I think diagnose how America became so extreme, how the Republican Party became so extreme. And as Paul Krugman says, GOP is terrified of the hardliners. How do they become hardliners? Right-wing media, specifically and starting with the Fox News effect. It's so direct, that connection, in my mind, in my opinion, covering politics for as long as I have, over a decade, and seeing that Fox News effect playing out in real life with listeners, with callers, and even with my own friends and family, of course. I'm sure you've seen it yourself. And if you ever watch Fox News, you can understand why. You're like, oh my God, if I watched this and believed it, I'd be terrified too. So much more to talk about that issue, but I'm going to wrap up my ranting and raving now and get to my conversation with Bill Boyle. All right, well, I hope to see you tonight's hangout. Thank you so much for your support this week. It was great to meet and hang out with a couple of listeners this week. I hope to do that maybe with you at some point soon. I'll actually be up in New Hampshire giving a talk to New Hampshire Democrats on Thursday of next week. Then we're going up to Ithaca for a little fall weekend to see our girl for the first time. So very much looking forward to that. And of course, I'll be in Pittsburgh headlining the City Winery in Pittsburgh, PA on October 11th with JL Cauvin. So maybe you could make it there. Okay. I hope you have a great Friday, and I am so happy you're spending part of that with me and Bill Boyle, who you should go follow on Twitter at Bill B in DC. He says he's a parking garage owner, a simple businessman in Washington, D.C., but when you listen to my conversation with him, it's hard to believe that he isn't more than that. Yet we can't find any evidence of him working for the government in any capacity, much less a spy or a spook. But we love talking to him. We love that he's part of our community, that he joins us for the Hangouts. Hope to see him tonight. But here we are right now. Bill Boyle, take it away.
All right. I've landed him, the most sought-after guest in all of Washington, D.C. Bill, thank you for joining me. Let's get right into the most important issue. I know you'd reach out to me and say, we've got to tape an hour on the Senate dress code controversy. So let it rip. I know you're very passionate about this issue.
I couldn't give less of a flying fuck about it.
I misread you.
Yes. No, what's hilarious about it is that it's such a bullshit and obviously bullshit thing to freak out about. You know, Manchin just sounds ridiculous. Like, he says he's not going to conform to it. Like, what does that mean? He's going to wear a tie on his tie or something? Like, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, dress codes in the Senate mean next to nothing. Like, does Fetterman, you know, like, respect the institution? Obviously he does. The people that are out there in the Senate right now, like, gumming up the process, like Tuberville, where he's disallowing the appointment of hundreds of officers in the military, that's disrespect for the institution. So fuck these guys. Such a ridiculous
Well, while
thing.
we're on
People are freaked out.
Disrespect for the institution, good time to just ask your take on the latest reporting from The Atlantic. I guess Jeffrey Goldberg again. He reported on this a couple of years ago when Trump was president, but more evidence of Trump's disdain and resentment for veterans, especially Gold Star families, veterans who died in the military. He really hates them. I remember in the reporting, by the way, he was at a gathering of families who'd lost a member of their family in the military, a Gold Star family gathering. He thought he might have gotten COVID from them. Anyway, new reporting about Trump and what he said about veterans, and it is outrageous. And I just have to wonder how any veteran could support Donald Trump after all he has said, much less done or not done, or said that he didn't do, like give money to a veterans charity.
Well, I mean, this is a guy who wouldn't go out to a cemetery at Normandy, I believe, because it was raining and he didn't want his hair to get messed up. I mean, Trump is a malignant narcissist and full of all kinds of weird neuroses, one of which is people who are like physically disabled freak him out. And that article about Milley, really, it's interesting what Milley does in that article, because he leads anyone who's reading it with any discernment in a couple of directions, one of which is that the Gallagher, Navy SEAL Gallagher, who Trump insisted upon giving him his pin back and reinstating in the military, Milley basically says that's how you end up with the SS, right? Like, he references a book about like ordinary men who became like prison card camps in the concentration camps. And then he also brings up like how Trump with Lafayette Square is kind of doing that. Like, couldn't you shoot him? Like, anyone going to think about shooting these people in the legs maybe? And what I pointed out is that's like sort of Trump trying to elicit some sort of like Führerprinzip. And Führerprinzip was the idea in Nazi Germany that you try to figure out what the Führer wants and then you go do it. And that's what Trump was trying to elicit. He was doing the old, who will rid me of this meddlesome priest thing. And I bet you Trump did that every day. And what Milley really gets at, without saying it overtly, and you can tell the guy went to Princeton, he's smart, the way he does this. He basically says, look, this is incipient fascism. This guy's a fascist. That's what Milley's really saying. At the same time, while trying to really patrol the line of not getting political as the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Yeah. But the article shouldn't be a real surprise to anyone who's paying attention. I think, though, that I would underline how much it shows that people like Milley, who saw Trump every week, if not every day, how he looked at that guy and went, that's a wannabe fascist dictator right there.
I'm glad you went in more depth to the article. Actually, I haven't read it. The Patriot, How General Mark Milley Protected the Constitution from Donald Trump. It's a long article by Jeffrey Goldberg, and I haven't read it. I just saw that poll quote that a lot of people are referring to, where apparently Trump at an event where this veteran who did 5 combat tours and lost a leg was singing.
That's right.
And his name is Mark Avila. And Trump said to Milley, why do you bring people like that here? Nobody wants to see that. The wounded. Never let that guy appear in public again. That's what Trump said to Milley. And apparently Milley then invited Mark Avila to sing at his retirement. And that's the kind of guy that Milley, that's how he decided to handle that, I guess.
Well, and it really gets at something, again, to go back to my theme, that, in Nazi Germany, like, people who were physically disabled were literally put into custody, like literally gassed to death, right? Trump has like that toolkit in his head. Yeah. Of like someone who, remember he made fun of that reporter who has ALS, I believe?
I think cerebral palsy.
Cerebral palsy. And where Trump, like, his disdain and hatred for someone who isn't physically all there is like really intense.
Isn't normative. Anybody who's not normative, he's that kind of bully. Yeah. And it's weird because he, puts on orange makeup and does the whole hair and all that. Yeah.
But, that of course gets at like how these guys are always frauds. Hitler was a weak-kneed, weird-looking guy. And yet he valorized 6'5" blonde dudes, right? I mean, there's always the core of insecurity and of weakness at the center of any fascist project. And, Milley actually gets at that really interestingly, where he talks about how Trump told him you should never apologize, ever. And Milley makes the point that, like, being able to apologize is a sign of strength. It's a sign of being, a real person with merit and honor and everything else.
And not being able to is a child. Children.
Of course, it's a weakness. It's an enormous weakness that you're unable to see yourself and make any sort of moral judgment about your own behavior. And so the article is quite good. I recommend it. It does not myth make about Milley, which I'm
looking forward to reading it. Let me ask you about what's happening in your town of Washington, D.C., specifically on Capitol Hill, and even more specifically in the House of Representatives, where there seems to be chaos this week, and I'm having a hard time following it. Headlines: House Republicans still don't have the votes as government shutdown looms. We're talking Thursday afternoon. Republican hardliners sink Pentagon bill in another blow for McCarthy. Politico: centrist Dems and McCarthy's allies are in secret talks to strike a deal. What is happening in the House Republican caucus? I know Hakeem Jeffries loves to call it a civil war, and Democrats and progressives seem to be entertained by this fight. But and that's fun, but it's also terrible, and I just don't understand it.
So the big deal is, or the basic deal is that they don't have very many votes left to control the House. It's a very narrow margin. And so the craziest 10 or 12 people, if they decide not to vote for Republican bills, unless Democrats come across the aisle, they're going to lose every time. The defense bill that's up there, it failed for the second time today, is the most anodyne, uncontroversial, regular order of business thing. They took out anything in it, like aid to Ukraine, that could have turned off anybody. And they're losing those votes anyway. It's a complete, what's the term that Plato used? It's a shit show. That's what Plato would have called it. And it's just, they are just, it's the inmates are running the asylum, and they don't really have an option, which is really what's funny, because Scalise has cancer, and Steve Scalise is being treated for cancer. He's not in good shape. If you booted out McCarthy, Steve Scalise is probably the only other figure that could actually command a majority of the House Republicans, excuse me. So they don't really have a choice. The crazies don't have a choice. That's why they haven't put up a motion to vacate the seat. But McCarthy can't make the crazies do anything. I am skeptical in the near term that a deal will be made with moderate Democrats and Republicans, because Democrats will ask for more than a pound of flesh. They're going to ask for a ton of flesh. Meaning,
if they've got to make a deal to keep government open, Republicans are going to have to make a deal with Democrats, which gives Democrats a tremendous amount of leverage.
Correct. It's going to be a Democratic bill, basically. And that's not even getting into the fact that they have to pass a bill that the White House will sign or that the Senate will pass. And there's nothing remotely close. These guys, what the bill is that they're supposed to be voting on, the continuing resolution or the budget bill, that's a negotiating document. They can't even come up with a document to start negotiating with. And if they can't do that, then there's literally no way they can later on, start to negotiate the terms. And, they're not going to get this bill. They can't even pass this bill. And any bill that is going to come back from the Senate and the White House is going to be remarkably different. And so there's no way they have the votes for that. So these guys are like, they are shooting themselves in the foot. We're catching some of the stray rounds because government's going to shut down, and it's going to be a big problem. And they don't seem to have any ability to get themselves out of it.
Any way to see how this plays out? Any best guess?
They're going to get pounded. They're going to get pounded and pounded and pounded and pounded. And it's going to start to hurt. Trump, by the way, is saying they should do this so that they can negotiate funding withdrawal from the DOJ so that they can't charge him.
Right. So, Trump is trying to get Republicans to defund the Department of Justice so that it's his crazy, insane, will never in a million years happen, but only an insane person would demand it, idea to get away with his crimes to defund.
Right. And so there's nobody out there who's going to counsel wisdom on their side. Right. It's just going to get crazier and crazier. And eventually, I think it's unlikely, but it's the least unlikely thing is that eventually 150 Republicans or 120 call the Democrats and say, let's just pass a bill.
And that will still be a Democratic
bipartisan bill.
Do you think that?
Oh, the Democrats, of course, will say, OK, so
there's going to be a lot of pain as a result of the government shutdown. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I'm thinking of Ty and other people that we actually know. But in the end, it could be a big win for Democrats on policy. By the way, Axios reporting most members of Congress are in agreement that there will be a shutdown on October 1st.
Yes, it's coming. There's just not enough time. And these guys can't get out of their own way. If they were capable and smart and good at politics, they would have come up with a bill 2 months ago. Right. And said, hey, we have a bill. Negotiate with us. And they could have gotten away with it now. But you have people like Gates, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Gomer, all these people, they're not really there to pass legislation. They're there to get clicks and be famous.
Yeah.
And so they don't have any, for the same reason, the same way Trump was not motivated by the idea of being a good president, right?
Yeah.
That's the way these people are motivated. They're motivated the same way. It's to get famous and to be able to raise a ton of money and have the rubes buy their NFTs or whatever other bullshit they're up to that day.
Podcast.
There you go.
Ted
there you
Cruz.
go. Yeah. So it's not going to be good because they can't get out of their own way.
Okay. Want to ask you about what happened this week internationally, specifically, I guess, in New York at the UN General Assembly. We heard from President Biden, who spoke a lot about Ukraine and trying to drum up support. And then, of course, we heard from President Zelensky, and he's been lobbying world leaders at the UN General Assembly. And today, President Biden announcing more aid, new military package for Ukraine. And the latest news today is that House Speaker Kevin McCarthy turned down the invitation, the request to have Zelensky speak to a joint session of Congress, which he did before. In the past, we've seen people like very controversial and divisive figures, Benjamin Netanyahu, was invited while he was criticizing President Obama. I remember House Republicans, who had the majority and the right to do so, invited him. It's their right. Kevin McCarthy turned it down. And the reaction to that bill I've seen is hard and swift, that basically the House Republicans are doing Putin's work. They're in Putin's pocket. Nobody is more effective on the battlefield than the House Republicans for Putin. That type of rhetoric coming from Rothkopf, I think you're sharing that and feeling that. How big of a deal is it that Kevin McCarthy Republicans turned down the invitation? What does it mean?
I mean, I think it can be overstated, the importance of this, because bottom line is that even within the Republican conference, the war in Ukraine is a popular thing. But again, we go back to the fact that he's got 22 crazies in the House who will pull everything to a stop whenever they get a chance because they are on Russia's side in this. And I'm being blunt, that's just where they are. And for McCarthy, if your choice is, he could have made it happen. I don't think there's a vote or anything. He just says, let's do it. I suspect that he was terrified of being embarrassed. That Zelensky would go in there and Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever would be screaming at him on the floor because they're saying really crazy things. And I think that the lack of decorum in the House and the bitter rivalries within the GOP's own caucus, I think McCarthy probably figured this doesn't work doing. I don't want to look even worse than I do now, right? And so I think that's my gauge or my guess as to what happened there. I do think that the war in Ukraine is actually a lot more popular than it is amongst the crazies in Congress and the GOP. Average people are pretty good with it, actually. And, I think the argument that we're spending less than 5% of our military budget to destroy our number 2 rival militarily, or maybe number 3 rival militarily in the world, is a pretty good deal. And when you look for polling that asks that particular question, it's like 70% of Americans are like, yeah, that's a great deal.
Yeah, 66% want a U.S. to support Ukraine, even a prolonged conflict. This is polling from Gallup in June of this year. I mean,
it's a popular thing, and Ukraine is a easy horse to bet on, right? For emotional reasons and for obvious political and strategic reasons. So McCarthy, I think, is a clown in many ways, but he's not stupid. The last thing he needs right now is to have Zelensky go on the floor of the House and be given the finger by the Freedom Caucus, right?
This is the only military conflict that we've even been tangentially involved with in my lifetime. This is just my opinion, that I have ever fully supported. The only one. Just this one in my lifetime. I am of the left. I am anti-war. I'm all radicaled up on that issue. But so it's a bit uncomfortable to make the argument. But the truth is, when we spend all that money and give them aid, a lot of the money comes back to America in terms of military defense contractors that are building weapons and hardware and systems that are being used there. So, I mean, war is a racket. It's good for the economy. There's no doubt about it. But this is one worth supporting. And I was thinking also just about, World War II, people coming together and women working in factories building planes and all that. That was worth fighting the Nazis. And so is this. Putin is the worst of our lifetime, and so we should fight him.
I agree. And what's interesting about it is that, Russia is conducting a colonial war. There is every reason in the world for people on the left to want to fight a colonial war.
Sure. Yeah.
For the same reasons that if I'm left wing and I hate pharmaceutical companies, I'm going to take their fucking medicine if I have cancer. Right.
Well, I don't know.
We are the chemo. We are the chemo. America is the chemotherapy for Russia.
Analogy I'm fully comfortable with, but go ahead. I don't think you need it. I think that, if they imperialistic tendencies should be prevented, including our own.
Yes, exactly. Well, of course. In this case, though, I can be a pretty strong critique of American foreign policy. That doesn't mean that I say, okay, because it's America, it sucks here too. It doesn't. We're actually we're doing the right thing for once, and it feels pretty nice.
Not committing infantry to a ground conflict is one big threshold I think is worth mentioning, because there's a lot of different gradations and nuances about military conflict. You have special operators. Nobody knows they're American. Nobody knows they're there. That's always going to be a thing. It's hard to comment on because you don't know where it is always. And then you have so many other levels. But right now we are supporting them with intelligence, with satellite capabilities, and obviously with limited weaponry. There's a controversy that we're, not providing them with more amongst rational people, I think.
And if I can address that, by the way, it really bothers me. We've got to give them F-16s tomorrow. We have to give them ATACMS.
That's the controversy from this week, is that the administration is still not giving them these ATACMS, ATMCS, whatever.
ATACMS. ATACMS is like the thing I hear journalists call it. So
it's a missile.
The bottom line is this, right? Wars are systems. And that system is a moral system, a political system, a logistical system, a military, tactical, operational, and strategic system. One weapon is almost irrelevant in that system. And there's a tendency, and I think that what the White House worries about probably, you give people these weapons and then Americans are like, okay, why aren't we winning? And that's not how this works. The F-16s are very expensive to fly, $15,000 a day to fly, with tons of logistical support required. Is it really the best thing to give them F-16s? I would say it's probably a lot more important to give them mine clearing equipment and artillery shells and boots and that sort of thing. The F-16s, no one's ever going to have, for instance, total control of the air in this war because of the anti-air defenses on both sides are too strong. So the F-16s thing is like a weird, people who should know better getting really wrapped up in that. And it's honestly not really post-war it'll matter. It doesn't matter during this war almost at all.
What about these missiles?
Well, they already have Storm Shadows.
As Biden dawdles on ATACMS, experts suggest next best thing for Ukraine.
Right. So those missiles are great. But, remember HIMARS are going to change the war and everything's going to be different?
That's a different kind of missile?
Right. It's the one that wiped out all the Russian supply depots last year. The Russians then separated out all their supply and spread everything around, and they reacted. The Russians are a terrible army, but they don't not react, right? They don't stand there to be shot. They don't keep all their supplies in one place for long range missiles to hit anymore. So the actual particular system that is sent means a lot less than the consistency of everything we send.
Right.
That's what really matters. Oh. And you're not. This war is, turning into a real slugging match. And a slugging match, one particular missile system isn't going to matter. But, they have Storm Shadows. The Ukrainians are building their own missile systems, Groms and other ones. Ukraine had a big missile production industry before the war, which is fully banging away now. So the idea that they have this huge need that we're not fulfilling is not really true. All we're talking about is a little extra range.
What else do you want to say about the current state of the war?
So what happened, much to my chagrin and most people's chagrin, is that the Russian defenses were a lot deeper, I think, than anyone realized. And so the Ukrainians smashed into them with tanks and got their nose broken on the first month. Well, the Ukrainians then switched tactics from a World War I maneuver style tank attack to a thing called bite and hold, which is where it's from World War I, and it's in a situation where defenses are dominant, which is what's happening in Ukraine right now. You use infantry to infiltrate. You cut off and chew up a bit of the Russian line. And then the Russians are going to attack because that's the Russian doctrine. They lose a piece of territory, they throw a ton of men at it. So you take a piece of infantry of area, you then defend it and let them wear themselves out trying to eject you. It is a really fantastic way to impose a lot higher attrition on your enemy than on yourself. And in a war of attrition, that's the game. And so the Russians are losing. The Ukrainians are attacking, and the Russians are actually losing 3 to 4 times as many men.
I mean, I can't believe I saw news this weekend that over 250,000 Russian men have been sent to their death in this useless, needless, horrible war where so many war crimes have been committed. But just that number, just that figure, in most countries that have anything remotely close to free speech or national media that's not state-owned, that could never happen, I feel, because the people would overthrow the government. The only thing, and I don't understand how it works, but the only thing, culture or media, I just can't imagine the Russian people being support of this conflict. I just don't, with all that, I can't fathom that number of people. I mean, we haven't lost that kind of number since the World War II, not even close, not in this short amount of time even. It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. Is that real number? How are they not overthrowing their dictator?
Well, there almost was a coup, actually.
Well, was that,
right? From Prigozhin.
Yeah.
Oh, and part of that was what drove Prigozhin, which was the casualties are insane, and nobody was doing anything about it. But remember, too, those casualties, 250,000 dead, probably 2.6 to 3 times as many wounded and can never come back, deserted, mental condition, PTSD and can't function. You're talking really more like 250,000 to 850,000 men knocked out of the war. And what that tells you about Russia is a thing that I've said to you before, that Russia is an atomized and totally, what's the word? There's no enthusiasm. The state, there's no party meetings. You don't see rallies in Russia, really. You don't have a neighborhood block that's organizing people like you had in Stalinist Russia or in, North Korea or Mao's China. You don't have a mobilized state. Russians are atomized, separated from each other, and they're demobilized. And so that works for a long time because what they can do is, Pete, it's not mostly Russians getting killed. It's mostly Buryats and Yakuts and all the sort of peripheral people, ethnic groups around the Russian sort of center mass. And as long as those people are getting killed, and it's not Pyotr from down the hallway, or that's
how is it not with those numbers? How is it not someone that they know?
Russia's what's the population? 100 million. So, there's a lot of ethnic groups to pull from who live in poor places, who really need the job. You get guys saying, all right, screw it. I'm going to make $300 a month. It's better than making zero. So and again, this gets back to the colonial nature of it, right? Russia is taking these people who are non-ethnic Russians and throwing them into the grinder. And that's the way this works. That's why the average Russian isn't freaking out. I don't think the average Russian loves this war. I think the average Russian kind of hopes they win, but hopes it's over soon. And I don't think the average Russian will think twice if Putin says we're done, we're pulling out. His coterie, the inner group, will kill him for it, probably. But the average Russian, they don't, good, the war's over. I can go back to Marseille, to the beach again. Right? I mean, that's really it.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You know a lot more than I do. I mean, I just can't. When I saw that number, I couldn't stop thinking about a country, a culture that could sustain that kind of. And for what? I mean, you can imagine. Ukrainians are fighting for their life, their homes, their everything. You understand why what they are sacrificing. You don't understand what the impetus for the Russians or how they're convinced, other than getting paid. So,
so the guys in the Russian army, I mean, we're talking people who have been used and abused their whole lives, right? I mean, if you're 20 years old,
true of many military.
Right.
I mean, you can make the argument about the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans of America being used and abused pretty easily.
Of course. And, I mean, I would not say when they're in the military, they're used and abused, right? I think that the U.S. military is smart enough to say, take care of these guys, train them really well, and you'll get huge bang for your buck.
better than most in a conflict, but I do believe being sent to Iraq is being used and abused to begin with. But go ahead. Yeah, we could go down.
Well, my point being that they take care of their soldiers a lot better, right? Versus now misusing them and fighting.
We are better than Russia. And part of that is because of the transparency that brave journalists give, even though the Pentagon tries to not have it. I mean, part of that is there is reason for that. Abu Ghraib, when I think about it.
Yeah. But you're getting at another point, by the way, which is there is no transparency in Russia.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
Like people don't know. They don't know, or they're just fed a line of bullshit every day on TV. It's not the two visions of the future, dystopian visions from the first half of the 20th century was going to be 1984, where you live in this intense Stalinist, highly controlled place where every word you utter is like could get you killed, right? The other vision was Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where you kind of lead this life of like sybaritic physical fun, and you just get fed so much bullshit every day that you don't even realize that you've lost the plot and that all of it's bullshit and that you live in a dictatorship. North Korea is 1984. Russia is Brave New World, where it's an awful state doing awful things. But the average Russian, they're still buying what they consider to be Western goods, and they're still living in a nice apartment in Moscow. And until all of that changes, they're going to accept that transaction to acquiesce to it.
Well said. Well thought out, of course. I don't know what some of the words you said meant. But I do want to ask you finally about our own little Putin, Donald Trump. Specifically, I wanted to just get your take on where you fall down, what your thoughts are about NBC Meet the Press having him on the show the way they did. We've heard from Michael Cohen with one take this week on this show, and Wajid Ali with a separate take on it. I've shared mine in that I think that we need to change our arguments sometimes given conditions. And I think that Donald Trump 2016 isn't Donald Trump 2023. I think the media is different. And, I think that it's possible that when he goes on TV, he has forgotten that he has the right to remain silent, and he's really hurting himself legally, and may have actually in that interview, which might be worth putting him on TV, getting him to, and he often will, walk right into a trap. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I agree with that last point. I do think that people don't like Trump. 50, 60% of Americans don't want him back. And it helps Democrats that if Trump is out there. I think that's Michael Cohen's argument to some degree, that when people see Trump, it hurts Trump politically.
Yeah. Yeah.
That being said, though, Welker goes a long way towards normalizing him. She had done that. She does that whole interview. He just spouts bullshit. She kind of challenges a little bit, but lets him do whatever. And then the interview ends and they kind of don't really fact check him. And then they only do the fact checking like online or, on their website, whatever. But they don't do it there.
If you only saw that interview, right. Yeah.
Yeah. You would think he seems like American politics thinks he's a reasonable guy, even if he's a nut.
Right. Yes.
And if they had done that interview where he speaks, she asks a question, he answers, break. What Donald Trump said is a lie or wrong or whatever. Like here's fact check. Then go to the next question. She asks the question, he answers, break. And you could say this is true, this is false.
Or
that
you could say
a very different thing.
You could say it. She could also say it during the interview. That is not true, yes, Mr. President, but I don't want to get hung up on that. But I want to let viewers know that's not something that happened. Right. There's 60 court cases that said the opposite, Mr. President, yes, or challenging him more in the moment, the way, say Mehdi Hassan or Jonathan Swan had. That's what Waj was saying. We've seen other people do a better job with him.
Yeah. So Michael Cohen is right in that exposure is bad for Trump. But Waj and Mehdi Hassan are right in that you have to challenge him. You have to, because I think what NBC is doing is looking at the demographics and saying, hey, we can get some eyeballs here. Some pro-Trump eyeballs will watch this, and that's good for our advertising revenue.
Well, no doubt about that. Yeah.
Right. And so it's a very cynical game that's played. And Welker, I had zero expectations that Meet the Press was ever going to be worth jack shit. And it wasn't that great when Tim Russert was there. May he rest in peace. It was never.
I fully agree with that.
It was a self-congratulatory bullshit sort of show.
Yep. Let me quickly ask you about two more things. One, I don't know what to make of this story, but it seems like a lot of people are making a big deal that Rupert Murdoch is handing control of Fox over to his son. Yeah. Do you know anything about that? Do you have any thoughts about it, Lachlan?
I do. So,
my reaction was like, so what? Like, what does that even mean? Right. I don't know.
Well, it's a big deal in this respect that the kids own the company equally. Okay, so there's 4 kids, and they own the company equally. So Lachlan, who is the Roman of this situation, right, the fascist curious son, he's going to be in control for a little bit. But when his father kicks the bucket, unless they've changed the way the company's set up, it's going to get sold. Fox is going to get broken for bits because now is the time to sell sort of that basic cable, wired cable thing. Never going to be more valuable than it is right now because the model of streaming and media and everything else is moving away from sort of the basic cable. You get paid for the news, blah, blah,
Kara
blah.
Swisher said Elon Musk is going to buy it.
That would not surprise me in the slightest if he's still around then. Elon, nothing would surprise me about him, whether he, took too much ayahuasca and walked off the Grand Canyon edge or something, wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. So it's, it's going to get broken up into pieces because the other 2 kids, I think it's the other 2. Yeah. They're like actually kind of liberal. So they're going to go, all right, do I really want to do this? Not really. They know that if they change if they change what Fox is too much, it loses its value. So they'll sell it. They'll walk away with a couple bill a piece and it'll be, the next Fox One World News or whatever will step up.
Finally, what is your take on the David Ignatiuses and other prominent, quote, serious pundits, journalists, or Democrats who are questioning the Biden-Harris ticket and that maybe it's time to make a change this late in the game?
I pour scorn upon them.
You do?
I do. It's a game that always gets played. There were people saying that about Obama at the same period before the 2012 election. Everyone tries to pretend that there's actually an elite out there that like moves the pieces around. And that's not how any of this works. If Biden tries to get rid of Harris, for instance, he's going to be pissing off the constituency that got him elected, which was female black voters. That's just not going to happen. If Biden leaves and there's a free for all, you're going to have Democrats attacking each other, all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And you probably have a less chance of winning, I think, in that instance, because it's unlikely you're going to get somebody who just Obama's in there and crushes it. So, the idea that Biden can walk away is bullshit. His approval rating's in the 40s. It's not a terrible approval rating. He has $1 billion yet to spend to run, and he's almost certainly going to be going against Donald Trump. That's a pretty decent bet. And by the way, the correlation between polling now and election day results is something under 5%. Like, it's just too far away. Nobody really knows. And the idea that we're going to, my God, we're in late middle 2023. It's more than a year away. That's a lifetime. Trump might be in jail by then, by the way, right? Biden may have been, Harris might be president. All kinds of things might happen. And I just think it's silly to, Ignatius and these guys, they all sort of, they think they have some sort of wisdom, and none of these guys have ever run a campaign.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always look at that. I'm like, God, you're not in politics. You don't know.
Yeah. I mean, some of them that are saying it and some of them that aren't, but I don't really trust a lot of people who have run campaigns because sometimes I think they're trying to build, a demand for their own services. Although they would know better, they would have the credibility, but I just don't,
Yeah, was it James Carville? Somebody just was pouring scorn on this idea the other day, and I loved it. It was just, I think it was Carville.
Okay,
It was just like rolling his eyes as hard as possible. I was like, show me who's going to run, who's got the coalition to win.
I did hear Carville, and maybe just to ask you this, and others pouring scorn on the Republicans' impeachment attempt and how, a lot of Democrats are like, please try to impeach Biden. That is good for us and terrible for you. And I'm not sure I buy that still, but I also don't know how much further they're going to go with this government shutdown, with all the spilled blood. Right. But anyway, what are your thoughts on impeachment?
So I'm in like a group on WhatsApp of guys that I knew who used to be moving conservatives before Trump came along. And when the announcement of the impeachment came up, I put a link to the article, and then I said, Biden reelects makes its first move, to which they all laughed, because you couldn't do a better favor to Biden than impeaching him over complete bullshit. It's perfect for him, because you're just going to see these simpering fucking baboons jumping up down in the House, making up bullshit that everyone knows is bullshit, except for like the worst of the MAGA people. Who does it help? What group says like, wow, they discovered that Biden pressed Ukraine to fire the prosecutor that was trying to help his son's company, and that's bad? Well, like the average person goes, wait, what the fuck are you talking about? He actually acted against his son's interests.
Right. Well, and if you read into that story, that there's no controversy there, there's no scandal, and a lot of Republicans like Ken Buck and others were there for that investigation when the Trump administration DOJ did it and found nothing, obviously, and against his interest. But even more of an example of the lack of corruption, one might argue, is that Joe Biden is not weaponizing the Department of Justice for political purposes, because if he is, he's terrible at it, because the Department of Justice just indicted his own son, and he couldn't prevent it.
His son got indicted for something that almost nobody ever gets indicted.
Yeah, that doesn't seem, if
$1
anybody's
million to 1. So they're bending over their backs to hammer his son so that they can't claim they're being corrupt. And that is a pretty big thing. And again, I think average people figure this out. And I think that, honestly, by the way, nobody's paying attention. Like, you see these polls, like almost none of those people are like highly locked in.
Well,
they do know they don't like Trump. They do know they don't like inflation. Our inflation on housing and cars is very high right now, and that pisses people off. But as you get closer to November of 2024, you're going to have Trump talking about like launching airstrikes on Tijuana for Americans like doing too much fentanyl.
Did you see?
The looniness is going to be there for everyone to see.
Did you see Republicans attacking Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg over subsidies for EVs?
Sir, it's called autumn. That jackass.
But I was so happy he made the argument, because I think a lot of Americans don't know this. And I remember when I learned it, that like $80 billion a year, I thought was the figure that the American taxpayer subsidizes fossil fuels, so that a gallon of gas is a lot cheaper here than it is in, say, Italy, which is why in Italy they drive little tiny Fiats, because it's like $8 for a gallon, the equivalent. I mean, they use liters, whatever. I could never do but the point is they drive smaller cars because you can't afford to drive a pickup truck or an SUV because they don't subsidize the price of oil. Of course, the United States government, in my opinion, and taxpayers should subsidize our sources of energy to make them more affordable for us, no matter what they are. And I would even argue they should pick winners, but they should be put out for bid, and whatever solar company gets it, gets it. But like, the future has to be renewable. I mean, I'm done, but I
call it the socialism of gas prices.
Yeah.
Right. That everyone wants socialism for me, but not for thee, right? Welfare for me, not for thee. That's how Americans bullshit themselves about everything. And I think that the thing about Buttigieg that's interesting is he does exactly what Obama did. He does exactly what Clinton did. He just explains things. Yes. That's his superpower. People watch him go out there and they're like, wow, look at that guy. He is killing it.
He's also not just, I notice this because I'm not this way, and I admire this about him. When he's being attacked professionally and personally, he rarely has the kind of reaction that a lot of men would, or that a lot of people would. You're attacking even the way that Merrick Garland got very reactive when he was attacked. Buttigieg would rather seemingly slowly shiv them with his calm, thoughtful argument.
what he did to that jackass in Congress yesterday who tried to claim that autumn was climate change. He went, excuse me, could you repeat that?
Yeah, he made
him repeat it like 2 or 3 times.
Right, he knew what he said the first time.
Oh, of course he did. But you make the guy keep repeating it and sound like a bigger douchebag every time he does repeat it.
He goes, what is autumn? And he goes, oh, you're referring to seasonal change?
Yeah, exactly.
That's not climate change.
Right. And so then he just goes and explains it.
Yes.
And the guy looks like a complete clown sitting there. Right. And I'm amazed that more politicians don't do that. Maybe it takes intellectual firepower to do it that well. But it seems like such an obvious thing. Someone says something crazy. Say that again. Like, just want to be totally clear and then just explain why they're wrong factually. And Buttigieg is great at that. I personally, if for whatever reason Biden didn't run in 2024, Buttigieg would be my first pick.
I so badly want to give the opportunity to, well, frankly, my utopian, I'd love to see a woman become the president of the United States. Who wouldn't? We almost had it. And I was talking about this with a friend, this is off the record the other day. I don't mind saying it to our audience, because I think a lot of people do not believe that America could elect a woman. And we were bullshitting, and we were just like saying, if you could just script out what type of candidate, what type of woman, and we couldn't even come up with like an actress like, Taya Leone, who played the Secretary of State, or like, we were like, no, America, there's too many people who just, for all the obvious reasons, aren't comfortable with it, which we're not there. And Pakistan beat us like 20 years ago. But
I think that in America, you would need either a liberal or conservative version of a Thatcher type. Somebody who intimidated the shit out of the men in her party. Yeah. And who actually was like a Thatcher.
I don't think so. I think an intimidating woman.
I really didn't like Thatcher. But Thatcher had this almost maternal way of talking to the public.
Yeah. Well,
that was really quite effective.
This is not the United Kingdom, even in the 80s. Like, we hate women here. We outlawed abortion, even in cases of rape and incest.
Super sexist in that era.
Huh?
Profoundly. The United Kingdom was profoundly
I'm not saying they weren't. I'm not saying they aren't now. Yeah. I'm saying America and women. But I do agree with you on Buttigieg. I think he would be a great president. The one more thing, though, I want to get you. We're not going to solve that one. One more thing I know that you're locked and loaded for, and a lot of people saw this on Twitter if you're still on this. New York Times conservative columnist David Brooks tweeted out a picture of a meal that he was having at Newark Airport, which is a burger and fries and what looks like a glass of whiskey. It could be watered down Coke, but he said, this meal just cost me $78 at Newark Airport. This is why Americans think the economy is terrible. And the issue here is that he's lying to some extent.
Yes.
And when you, like, Charlotte Clymer snuffed this whole out. She literally must have spent an hour looking at the menus at Newark Airport, found the burger that they serve on a napkin the way he did. And it's like fully loaded $28. And he's, so what is your smart take on this?
Well, there's nothing that says you're a man of the people more than being pissed off that you paid $50 for a fucking Macallan at Newark Airport. Right. I mean, it's such a ridiculous.
He paid $50 for whiskey.
Yes, for a Macallan whiskey, right? That's what it looks like. And somebody said they literally think it's a Macallan. And he is such a, like, gross commentator because he is an elite in every sense of the term who poses as like a common man. And there's nothing worse than that. I mean, he really imagines he has his pulse on the finger of, like, America. When how many fucking Americans get to fly through Newark Airport on business and drink scotch and have a burger in the airport? Like, most Americans don't fly, period. And they're certainly not spending $78 on a drink and a burger. I mean, like, it's just, he's so gross and ridiculous. And, my experience personally with David Brooks is, he had that book, what was it, The Virtues or something, about public virtue and private virtue. And right after that book came out, there was like his people were thinking about doing something in DC, and they wanted to talk to sort of neighborhood activist types. And they reached out to me and wanted to talk about, gentrification, DC politics, and whatever. And the woman who came to interview me was an assistant of his, and she was a completely beautiful, long-legged redhead who, she was quite nice. I actually liked her. She was great. But it was like, I'm looking at her going like, dude, you're the guy who left your wife for your research assistant.
Yeah.
and look at who I'm talking to, right? Like, so obviously, like, lame. I mean, and that guy, he just is such a walking pile of
dude. When
every reason why people hate the New York Times op-ed page, because it's just so bullshit and feckless and fake.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I just have something super petty to add, and I shouldn't even say it. It's petty as hell, but it's how I felt. And Aspen Ideas Fest 3 years in a row, I'd see him there. And he had just begun that relationship with that research assistant, and she was always with him. And the first year, I just thought it was a woman that he worked with because she's so much younger and she's really beautiful. Yeah. And when I found out he was dating her and then married her, the pettiest, I always love just doing mismatches, especially when it's an attractive woman and an unattractive or older man or something. I just go mismatch on it. And it was just it made me uncomfortable how much younger, more beautiful and taller she was than this frumpy nerd guy. And it's so petty and it's not fair to him or their relationship. I hope they're happy, but I will say what I just said.
Well, and the fact that she's sort of guarding the doghouse so carefully tells you everything.
I don't know about
right? Like, I mean, it just, I met his assistant and was like literally laughing. I made a joke about it to her. I was like,
I'm so close to editing that out because I feel so petty, but I'm leaving it in.
Leave it in. Yeah, let's be petty. I mean, she, and by the way, his assistant was quite nice. She was smart, whatever. Sure. She was great.
Sure.
But it was like so clearly like dude has a type and tries, it's like David's angels that he surrounds himself with. And it's just gross. It's just so gross.
I don't like that.
He's exactly that guy who will sit in an airport bar bitching about the price of scotch. Like, and imagine that he's like down amongst the people. I mean, fuck him. That is so lame. And I'm sure tomorrow he'll post that, it was all a joke. And you guys, I won, I got you.
Oh,
but I don't think so. Yeah.
All right, man. Great talk as always. So glad you were available. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on. It's nice to be able to vent my spleen once in a while.
I know. I wanted to give you that opportunity. You're welcome.
All right. There he goes. Our belly boil. Love talking to Bill. And I thought that was a great one. A lot of great insights, context, and knowledge, as always, from Bill. I hope that you will go out and introduce yourself to him if you haven't already on social media. If you like him, he's on the threads, he's on the Twitter, he's on all the things. And if you're in D.C., absolutely look him up. I'll give you his number. And that's all I've got for you today, but probably not for the week. I'm looking forward to dropping a couple of conversations over the weekend. We'll see what happens if I can get them done and edited and out, which I hope to. It's going to be a real rainy one, apparently. Big storm coming on the East Coast this weekend. I hope you are good and safe and happy and have a good one. I am so thankful that you listened today. I hope to see you at the Hangout. If you're still listening, you're a bumblebee. That means you listened to the very end, and I love you and cherish you the very most. Jon Carroll, one of our favorites, of course, taking us out today and always. Go listen to his Union Made song. It's on YouTube. I've linked to it in the show notes, and we want to give that some views. He's also out on tour. So check out his website for those dates. All links in the show notes. John, sing us into the weekend.
That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand